Don't drink that water. The small voice caught through the Crystal Crown Hotel ballroom, just as Billionaire CEO Daniel Whitmore raised the glass to his lips. Music stopped. Forks froze above porcelain plates. Nearly 300 investors, executives, and politicians turned toward the entrance, where a thin girl in a torn red coat stood between two security guards. Rainwater dripped from her tangled brown hair onto the polished marble floor. Her shoes were several sizes too large, held together with silver tape. One guard tightened his grip on her arm. "She slipped in through the service entrance," he said. "We're removing her now." But the girl did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Daniel's glass. "Please," she whispered, "put it down." Daniel was 52, the founder of one of the country's largest construction companies, and a man who rarely allowed anyone to interrupt him. That evening, he had just announced a $2 billion merger that would reshape the city's skyline. Cameras surrounded him. His board members waited for the celebratory toast. Beside him, his business partner, Victor Hale, gave an embarrassed laugh. "It's only water, Daniel. The child is looking for attention." The guests chuckled uneasily. Daniel studied the girl. Her cheeks were hollow, and one sleeve of her coat was ripped open at the elbow. Yet she did not appear confused or frightened. Beneath the coat, she clutched a faded green backpack against her chest. The corner of an old medical book protruded from its broken zipper, its cover stained and softened by years of use. "Why shouldn't I drink it?" Daniel asked. The girl swallowed. "Because that isn't the glass they placed there before your speech." A murmur moved across the ballroom. Victor's smile disappeared for half a second, then returned. "This is absurd. Security, take her outside." The guards began pulling her backward. Her oversized shoes scraped against the marble. "No," she cried. "The man with the white gloves changed it." Every waiter in the room wore white gloves. Daniel glanced down at the glass. Clear water. A slice of lemon. Nothing unusual. The hotel manager hurried forward, his face burning with humiliation. "Mr. Whitmore, I deeply apologize. Our staff would never endanger a guest." To prove his words, the manager reached for the glass. The girl's expression changed instantly. "Don't!" But pride moved faster than caution. The manager lifted the glass and took a small swallow. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the glass slipped from his hand. It shattered across the stage. The manager grabbed the edge of the table, his face turning pale as his knees buckled beneath him. Guests screamed and pushed away from their chairs. A doctor attending the gala rushed forward while Daniel stood frozen, staring at the broken glass near his shoes. The ballroom, that had celebrated him moments earlier, now felt cold and airless. Daniel turned toward the entrance. The security guards were still holding the girl. She was trembling now, but not from fear. She pointed past Daniel, toward the service corridor behind the stage. "The man who changed it," she said softly. "He's still inside the hotel." The security guards released the girl only after Daniel ordered them to. Across the ballroom, paramedics were lifting the hotel manager onto a stretcher. The doctor who had rushed to help him said the amount he swallowed had been small enough to save him, but no one knew yet what had been placed in the water. Daniel watched the stretcher disappear through the doors. Then he looked at the girl. She stood alone beneath the cold chandelier light, clutching her faded green backpack so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Now that the danger had passed, she seemed much younger than Daniel had first realized. 10 years old, perhaps 11. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily." "Emily what?" She lowered her eyes. "Just Emily?" Police officers began sealing the ballroom and questioning the staff. Victor Hale stood nearby, speaking urgently into his phone. Every few seconds, he glanced toward the girl with an expression Daniel could not understand. Daniel led Emily into a quiet conference room away from the frightened guests. On the table were untouched pastries, fruit, and bottled water. Emily stared at the food, but she did not reach for it. "You can eat," Daniel said. "I'm not stealing." "No." Only then did she take a roll. She broke it in half and carefully wrapped one piece in a napkin before placing it inside her backpack. Daniel noticed. "Saving it for later? For my brother." Her voice softened on the final word. Emily and her 6-year-old brother, Noah, had been sleeping behind a closed laundromat 3 blocks from the hotel. Their mother had died 2 years earlier after a long illness. Their father had disappeared before Noah learned to walk. For several months, the children had lived with an aunt, but when the aunt lost her apartment, Emily and Noah were sent to separate shelters. Emily had run away after 3 nights. "I promised Mom we'd stay together," she said. "So I went back for him." Since then, they had moved between shelters, bus stations, church basements, and anywhere that offered enough warmth to survive the night. Emily collected bottles, cleaned tables at an outdoor market, and sometimes stood near hotel entrances asking strangers for leftover food. Daniel looked at her torn coat. "How did you know the glass had been changed?" Emily opened her backpack. Inside were 2 shirts, a small flashlight, a cracked photograph of a smiling woman holding 2 children, and the old medical book Daniel had noticed earlier. Its pages were covered with handwritten notes. "My mom was a nurse," Emily said. "She used to study at night." Daniel picked up the book carefully. On the inside cover, written in fading blue ink, were the words, "For Emily, notice what others ignore." "She taught me to watch people," Emily continued. "Their hands, their breathing, the little things they think no one sees." Her mother had once turned observation into a game. She would ask Emily which neighbor was limping, which customer had switched coats, or which cup on a table had been moved. After her mother became sick, Emily watched even more closely. She learned when pain was coming before her mother admitted it. She learned to recognize fear hidden behind a smile. That evening, Emily had entered the hotel kitchen hoping to find discarded food for Noah. From behind a linen cart, she saw a waiter in white gloves approach Daniel's table. But there was something wrong. "He wasn't carrying a tray," she said. Daniel leaned closer. Emily's fingers tightened around the photograph in her lap. "And the tattoo on his wrist," she whispered. "I've seen it before." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Where did you see the tattoo?" Emily looked toward the glass wall of the conference room. Beyond it, hotel staff hurried through the corridor, while police officers checked identification cards and searched service areas. "At the bus station," she said. "3 nights ago." Before Daniel could ask more, the conference room door opened. Victor Hale stepped inside with 2 police officers and the hotel's head of security. His expensive suit was still perfectly pressed, but the calm expression he had worn in the ballroom was gone. "There she is," Victor said. "The child who somehow knew exactly which glass was dangerous." Emily pulled the backpack against her chest. Daniel stood. "She saved my life. Or she helped create a scene," Victor replied. "Think about it. She entered through a restricted area, hid near the kitchen, and claimed she recognized a man no one else saw." The head of security placed a clear plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a small empty bottle. "We found this behind a linen cart near the service entrance," he said, "close to where the girl was hiding." Emily stared at it. "I've never seen that." Victor leaned toward her. "Then why were your fingerprints on the cart?" "Because I was hiding behind it." A police officer opened Emily's backpack and began removing her belongings. The 2 shirts, the flashlight, the wrapped piece of bread, the photograph. When he reached for the old medical book, Emily grabbed it first. "Please don't." The room fell quiet. Victor pointed at the book. That looks interesting. It belonged to my mom. The officer gently took it from her hands and turned through the pages. Notes about symptoms, medications, and emergency care covered the margins. Nothing criminal. Nothing that explained the poisoned glass. Still, Victor gave a cold smile. A homeless child carrying a medical book, entering a private gala, and predicting someone would collapse. That is quite a coincidence. Emily's lips trembled, but she did not cry. Daniel watched her face. He had spent 30 years negotiating with men who lied for money, power, and survival. They often spoke too much. They looked for approval. They changed details when challenged. Emily did none of those things. She simply looked tired. The officer placed the book back on the table. Emily, describe the man you saw. Tall. Gray hair. White gloves. He walked with his left shoulder lower. That could describe half the staff, Victor said. Emily looked at him for the first time. He wasn't staff. Victor's jaw tightened. How would you know? His shoes. Everyone glanced down instinctively. Emily explained that the hotel workers wore soft black shoes with rubber soles. The man she saw had polished leather shoes with a narrow heel. They made a sharp sound on the kitchen tiles. Click. Pause. Click. She had heard the same uneven rhythm at the bus station 3 nights earlier. The man had been watching her and Noah while speaking on the phone beside a black car. When Emily looked directly at him, he pulled down his sleeve, but not before she saw the tattoo on his wrist. A small black crown split through the center. Victor stepped closer. You expect us to believe a stranger followed you here? No, Emily said quietly. I think he followed Mr. Whitmore. A silence settled over the room. Then the head of security's radio crackled. A guard's frightened voice came through. We found a waiter unconscious in the basement. His uniform is missing. Daniel turned toward the door. Victor's face had gone pale. Emily watched him carefully, just as her mother had taught her. Then she noticed the edge of a black mark beneath his shirt cuff. Mr. Whitmore, she whispered, don't let him leave. Daniel stepped between Victor and the door. Show them your wrist. For the first time that evening, Victor did not answer immediately. The police officers moved closer. Around them, the conference room seemed to shrink beneath the cold white lights. Emily stood beside the table with her old medical book pressed against her chest, watching every breath Victor took. Then Victor slowly pulled back his cuff. There was no tattoo. Only a dark smudge near the edge of his wrist. Victor gave a quiet laugh. You frightened everyone over a little ink. Emily's face reddened, but she did not look away. Daniel studied her. For one terrible moment, doubt returned. Perhaps fear had confused her. Perhaps the man at the bus station and the man in the hotel were not connected at all. Victor reached for the door. I'm done with this. Wait, Emily said. Her voice was not loud, but everyone stopped. She placed the medical book on the table and opened it. Several loose pages slipped out, including a note written by her mother years earlier. Across the top, in faded blue ink, were 5 words Emily had read hundreds of times. When faces lie, watch movement. Emily turned toward the head of security. Can you show me the ballroom camera? Minutes later, they gathered inside the hotel's surveillance room. Rows of screens filled the darkness with pale blue light. The service corridor footage had been deleted, but one camera near the ballroom entrance had captured the imposter for less than 6 seconds. His face was hidden beneath a waiter's cap. Victor folded his arms. You can't identify anyone from that. Emily moved closer to the screen. Play it again. The figure crossed the hallway carrying Daniel's glass. His left shoulder hung lower than the right. His polished shoes moved with an uneven rhythm. Click. Pause. Click. Emily listened, then pointed toward the bottom corner of the screen. "Stop there!" The guard froze the image. Nothing appeared unusual until Emily asked him to enlarge the silver serving tray beside the doorway. Its curved surface held a distorted reflection of the corridor. The image was faint, almost lost beneath the ballroom lights. But in that reflection, the imposter had briefly lifted one gloved hand to adjust his cap. A large ring shone on his finger. Daniel turned slowly toward Victor. Victor wore the same ring, a heavy gold band engraved with the Whitmore Hale Company crest. Only 3 existed. Daniel owned one. Victor owned another. The third had belonged to Victor's father, and was locked inside the company vault. Victor slipped his hand into his pocket. An officer immediately stopped him. "It proves nothing," Victor said, but his voice had changed. Emily stared at his shoes. A narrow silver strip had been placed beneath the heel of the right one, repairing a small crack. Each time Victor shifted his weight, it made the sound she remembered from the bus station. Click. Pause. Click. "He changed his hair," Emily whispered. "But he couldn't change the way he walked." The police searched Victor's jacket. Inside, they found a hotel master key and the missing waiter's identification card. No one spoke. Victor's face emptied of color as the officers placed him in handcuffs. Daniel watched the man he had trusted for 20 years being led toward the door. Then Victor suddenly turned toward Emily. "You have no idea what you've done." Emily's hands trembled, but she raised her chin. "Yes, I do," she said. "I noticed." By midnight, the ballroom had emptied. The flowers still stood beneath the chandeliers, but the celebration was gone. Police tape crossed the stage where Daniel had nearly raised the poisoned glass. Outside, rain blurred the city lights against the hotel windows. Victor had confessed only after investigators found messages connecting him to the disguised man. The merger would have exposed years of stolen company funds, secret accounts, and forged contracts. Daniel's death would have delayed the investigation and given Victor control long enough to destroy the evidence. Yet Daniel barely heard the detective's explanation. He was watching Emily sleep in a chair near the fireplace. Her torn red coat covered her like a blanket. The old medical book rested against her chest, held there by both arms. Even in sleep, she seemed afraid someone might take it away. A police officer had found Noah at the closed laundromat. The little boy was now curled beside his sister, wearing Daniel's suit jacket over his thin sweater. Before falling asleep, Emily had given him the bread she had saved. She had not taken a single bite herself. Daniel sat across from them, struggling to understand how a child with nothing had risked everything for a stranger. When Emily woke, she found him holding the cracked photograph from her backpack. "Your mother's name was Sarah Bennett?" he asked. Emily nodded cautiously. Daniel turned the photograph over. A date and a hospital name were written on the back. His hands began to shake. 14 years earlier, before the private jets, magazine covers, and billion-dollar buildings, Daniel had been a small contractor drowning in debt. One winter night, he collapsed at a construction site after ignoring chest pain for hours. Most of that night had disappeared from his memory. But he remembered a young nurse with tired eyes sitting beside him in the emergency room. Daniel had no insurance then, no family nearby, and barely enough money for the taxi home. The nurse stayed after her shift ended. She found a charity program to cover his treatment. She brought him coffee. And when he admitted he was afraid his business would fail, she wrote something on the back of a hospital card. A life is not measured by the moment it falls, but by the hands that help it stand again. Daniel had carried that card in his wallet for years. "Your mother saved me once," he whispered. Emily looked at him in disbelief. Daniel opened the medical book to its first page. Beneath the message Emily had shown him, for Emily, notice what others ignore, there was another line, almost erased by time. Kindness is also something worth noticing. Emily touched the handwriting with one finger. She said people miss it because it's usually quiet. Daniel looked away, ashamed. Sarah had helped him when he was poor and invisible. But after becoming powerful, he had stopped seeing people like Emily. He passed homeless families from behind tinted windows. He held charity dinners without knowing a hungry child was sleeping 3 blocks away. Emily had not recognized Daniel from her mother's stories. She had not entered the hotel to repay a debt. She had simply seen danger and acted. "Why did you come back after security pushed you away?" he asked. Emily looked at Noah sleeping beside her. "Mom said if you can stop something terrible and walk away, then part of it belongs to you." Daniel lowered his head. All his wealth had failed to protect him. But a forgotten act of kindness, carried inside an old book by a child everyone ignored, had crossed 14 years to save his life. And in that quiet room, Daniel understood that Emily had not only noticed the man with the poisoned glass. She had forced Daniel to notice the man he had become. 3 weeks later, the Crystal Crown Hotel ballroom opened again. The broken glass was gone. The police tape had disappeared. Fresh flowers stood beneath the chandeliers, but Daniel had canceled the merger celebration and replaced it with something no one expected. At the center of the stage was a photograph of Sarah Bennett. Emily stood near the front row in a clean navy dress, still wearing her old red coat over it. Daniel had offered to buy her a new one, but she had shaken her head. "It was my mom's," she told him. So instead, he had asked a tailor to repair every tear without changing its shape. Noah sat beside her, swinging his feet beneath the chair. For the first time in months, neither child had to wonder where they would sleep that night. Daniel had arranged a permanent home for them with Sarah's older sister, who had recently regained stable housing and had been searching for the children. He paid the overdue rent, secured legal support, and created an education fund in both their names. But he did not try to buy their love. That mattered to Emily. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, the room became quiet. He spoke without prepared notes. "I spent most of my life believing power meant being the person everyone noticed," he said. "I was wrong." He looked toward Emily. "Real power is noticing the person everyone else has chosen not to see." The audience rose in applause, but Emily remained seated. She was not used to being celebrated. Her fingers tightened around the repaired sleeve of her coat. Daniel then announced the Sarah Bennett Foundation, a program that would provide emergency housing, meals, medical support, and school placement for families with children living on the streets. The first shelter would open inside a building his company had planned to turn into luxury offices. Victor's stolen money, once recovered through the courts, would be added to the foundation. Later that evening, after the cameras were gone, Daniel found Emily standing alone beside the table where the poisoned glass had once rested. "Are you afraid to be here?" he asked. "A little. So am I." She looked up at him. "Rich people get scared?" Daniel smiled sadly. "More often than they admit." He handed her a small framed card. It was the message her mother had written to him 14 years earlier. A life is not measured by the moment it falls, but by the hands that help it stand again. Emily read it twice. "You kept this all those years?" "I forgot who gave it to me," Daniel said. "But I never forgot how it made me feel." She held the card against her chest, beside the old medical book. In the months that followed, Daniel visited the children without photographers or assistants. He helped Noah build model airplanes. He listened as Emily talked about becoming a nurse like her mother. Years later, the first person Emily treated during her hospital training was a frightened homeless man whom everyone else had dismissed as difficult. She sat beside him and said, "I see you." Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness does not disappear. It waits. It travels quietly through years, through loss, through strangers, until one day it returns at the exact moment someone needs saving. And sometimes, the person the world refuses to notice is the only one paying attention. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment about someone whose kindness you never forgot. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that compassion is never wasted.